So welcome to our final webinar for 2021, our final AGRE webinar. For those of you who aren't aware of what AGRE is, it's the Association of Graduate Regulatory Educators, and it was formed in 2010. It brings together the global regulatory affairs educators to share best practice, form a community of practice in regulatory education, promote continuing development of regulatory science as an academic discipline, facilitate shared education and research initiatives in regulatory science, provide a forum for discussing issues in regulatory science and impact policies affecting regulatory education. We're always looking for new members, so if you're interested, please log on to the website and you're welcome to join us. I just wanted to say at the beginning, before we move on to the presentations, very warm congratulations to one of our board members, Jim Polly, who recently won the TOPRA Award for Regulatory Excellence in Education. So very warm congratulations to Jim, and great representation of the AGRE membership winning such a distinguished award. So I would just like to hand over to our speakers and just to introduce them briefly. Our first speaker will be Alina Yoffe, and Alina is my Masters by Research student at UNSW, and one of her fellow supervisors is on the call as well. So Alina has already completed a Master's in pharmaceutical medicine at the University of New South Wales, and she is currently a clinical trials manager. She's been working in the industry since 2011 in various clinical research roles in both medical devices and in the pharmaceutical industry. So I will hand over to you, Alina, to discuss your topic, and you can load up your slides.
Very excited to be here today. It's great, and thank you for this opportunity. So we're going to talk about the Medicine and Medical Device Regulation Review that occurred in Australia, and the introduction of accelerated regulatory approval pathways and their impact on access to new and novel medicines in Australia. And this is also the theme of my master's project, and I'm very privileged to have as my supervisors Associate Professor Orin Chisholm and Dr. Greg Smith and Dr. Johnson Leo, who is on the call today. So just a little bit of a background. Australia's National Regulatory Agency is Therapeutic Goods Administration, TGA. TGA reviews and approves about 35 new chemical entities annually. This includes vaccines. And the expectation is, of course, from the industry, the consumer, the regulatory world, is that the medicines that are approved are safe, efficacious, and of high quality in terms of their manufacturing, and that the approval and access are granted quickly, and that the review is speedy, but at the same time is competent, and the regulator processes are efficient and transparent, and the evaluation scope and the reg burden to the industry are commensurate with risk, and these are high expectations, particularly in the context today of rapid scientific progress and new medicines coming into market with growing complexity, such as cancer and cell and gene therapies, and there are limited skills available among the national regulatory authorities to actually evaluate those products. And so the 21st century best regulatory practice is convergence and harmonization of standards and recognition and reliance arrangements in regards to each other's regulatory products. And so if you look a bit back in 2014, the status quo in Australia was that we were the only geography among developed Tier 1, Tier 2 NRAs with no accelerated review options at all. And the industry complained about duplicative and disproportionate to risk regulatory requirements, and complex and quite hard to navigate legislation and outdated processes on behalf of the regulator. And so in 2014, in October, a review of medicines and medical devices regulation was announced. And one of the most important outcomes of it was introduction for the first time of the facilitated regulatory pathways, FRPs, priority review and provisional approval, 2 pathways. The review was done by a panel of 3 people prominent in the industry, the Emeritus Professor Lloyd Sansom, that the right top picture, as the chair, and he was assisted by Professor John Horwath and Mr. Will Dellard. And the scope of this review was quite broad. It was pharmaceuticals and medical devices, over-the-counter, complementary, and patient access as well. In this presentation, we will only look at prescription medicines, and within those only on at new chemical entities. A bit of a timeline. The review was completed within very impressive timelines. The panel released as the start a stage 1 discussion paper where they wanted to benchmark the TGA's regulatory framework and to see if there was a shared understanding by the stakeholders of the current regulatory situation and issues and the desired developments. They collected the submissions within 1.5 months, so 21st of November, almost 7 years to the day, until 5th of January. So only 1.5 months, 6 weeks for submissions. They collected the responses, and within 3 months, they released a stage 1 report with recommendations. The government started to assess that response, and it took 1.5 years. And in September 2016, the government response was released, and then to introduce the 2 facilitated pathways, legislative changes were needed, so these were introduced in June 17 and March 18 for priority review and PA, provisional approval, respectively. So today, after the review, we have 7 ways to register a prescription medicine in Australia. A standard pathway existed before the review. Priority review and provisional approval were added as a direct result of the review. Priority review is basically a quicker review of an important medicine. Provisional approval is approval based on a limited data set, and that needs to then be transferred into a standard approval. Comparable overseas regulator is a significant modification of what used to be a category 2 pathway, which has been modified and changed to make it more viable and usable in the industry, and basically more widely used. And then the Australia, Canada, Singapore, Switzerland, and United Kingdom Access Consortium was not a direct result of this review, but these pathways, Access and Project Orbis, which was introduced in May 2019, were just further developments after the review. So my project, I aim to analyze the impact of this reform, and in particular the introduction of these 2 new FRPs in the Australian regulatory system for prescription medicine, for instance, to evaluate the total number of NCEs coming into Australia and the submission gap between Europe and US and the submission in Australia, and timing of registration decisions, obviously. We hypothesize that in general, the fact that these pathways are available to the TGA will accelerate access to those novel and important medicines in Australia. We'll also look at the extent to which the industry is willing to utilize them and what they perceive as barriers or enablers, and what their general comments and thoughts and wishes are. So this table, I hope you can see it, that the font is big enough, just gives a bit of comparison of the elements of the standard pathway and provisional approval and priority review. So both PR and PA are for severe or life-threatening diseases with no products available or with the new product showing evidence of significant advance or improvement. PR requires a full dossier, typically a phase 3 RCTs, and PA is suitable for products in early stages of development, which show this great promise with limited data set, typically phase 2 trials, where the benefit-risk profile is positive. Legislative timeframe in Australia for all three pathways, interestingly, is 255 TGA working days. This excludes company time. It's just a regulated time. However, within provisional approval, TGA target time is 220 days. So the regulator prioritizes those important medicines within the legislative timeframe. And for priority review, the target is 150 working days, which is in line with Europe and US 6-month timeframe as well. The review is quite structured in Australia, so there are 8 phases in each pathway, but in priority review, they are dynamic for maximum efficiency and time saving. Rolling questions are allowed in priority review as well, not to stop batching the questions and replies. In provisional approval, rolling data submission is a possibility at pre-agreed time points. So if you don't yet have a phase 2, you can submit and then provide that data to regulator while the regulator is assessing. Contact with TGA in Australia is quite limited because TGA is a medium-sized regulator and they do not provide the support of early clinical program development or protocol development or things like that, which the US enjoys with FDA. So TGA just has a pre-submission meeting, which is also optional mostly and only strongly recommended for the provisional approval where the medicines are complex. Looking at the numbers within the determinations, we can see that the numbers of approved determinations increase year by year. So back in February 2020, there were 30 PR determinations approved. That's roughly 12 per year since the pathway became available, and 14 PA, that's approximately 7 per year. In the following year, 15 additional PRs have been approved, and 18 provisional approval determinations were approved in just 1 year. And you can see that the first determination was approved very shortly after the pathway actually was available, after the legislative timeframe, the legislative framework was updated. So for priority review, that's July 17, and the first determination was already approved 1 month later. And similar for provisional approval, it's March and April 18, you already have the first determination approved. In PA, the determination, the majority of indications is oncology, with a few in infectious diseases and hematology. In PR determination, also the majority is in oncology, but there is a wide range of other anatomical therapeutic classification, sort of therapeutic areas. So together, these pathways cover quite a wide range of diseases and medicines. These are approvals. So the first slide was determinations. These are approved medicines, and we can see that the most common indication is, again, oncology in both PR and PA. In PR, there are additional, less frequent indications as well. It's interesting to see that the sponsors are diverse. So I have listed the sponsors here, and the only one who submitted and got their product approved twice is Roche. The rest just submitted and got 1 product approved, and the approved products are listed here. The data is a few months old, but So looking at a bit of numbers here, in 2018, 3 PR medicines were approved with mean approval time of 104 TGA working days, which is a significant reduction from 2006 in the standard pathway. Year after 2019, 4 PRs and PA was added, so 2 PA medicines were approved. Again, significant reduction in 144 and 135 working days compared to 199 in the standard pathway. And in 2020, 5 PR, 5 PA, so you can see that the numbers increase in each of the pathways, gradually increase, and the number of days in the standard pathway actually decreases. And that's a global thing. So all regulators, all national regulatory authorities, times to approval decrease, so TGA is not alone. Survey. So as part of the project, we've developed a survey with up to 44 questions, depending on the experience of the respondent, to evaluate the industry perception of the accelerated pathways. So we included the standard pathway as well across the same parameters to have a more complete picture and a good benchmark. The survey was anonymous. It was suitable for regulatory affairs professionals who have had experience with at least one of the 3 pathways. Despite this being a negligible risk project in Australia, it required a full ethics committee approval. And we had a proper consent and an ethics approved text for the email invite. And the survey was distributed through industry peak bodies and pharmaceutical media outlets. We looked at and compared across the pathways the level of overall satisfaction, amount, availability, and ease of use of the NRA and government guidelines, level of support that the regulator provides, timeliness of approval, of course, and the suggestions for improvement and general comments from the industry. We were also interested to see if people thought that their company's strategy would change as a result of the introduction of those 2 accelerated pathways in Australia. So whether their company would be likely to submit in Australia more or submit earlier. We received 16 responses out of about 40 companies who at that time had a submitted and approved determination. Of the 16 respondents, all had experience with the standard pathway, 9 had experience with PR and 10 with PA. We can see that people were generally satisfied with the PR, with 8 out of 9 indicating that they are satisfied with the pathway. And everybody thought that that pathway had a beneficial effect on expediting the review from slight to extremely expedited. With PA, the responses are more ambivalent. 6 out of 10 respondents expressed satisfaction with the pathway, but we have 1 who is neutral, 2 who are slightly dissatisfied, and 1 customer who is extremely dissatisfied with that pathway. And in terms of time as well, 60% thought that there was a significant, was some level of improvement, some kind of, quicker review, but then some didn't see any improvement, and 1 thought that it was slightly delayed, actually, perhaps because the medicine is more complex and the uncertainty is higher, and it took the regulator actually a longer time to review. In terms of general comments, of course, everybody wants for the standard pathway length of registration process to be shorter, and also in the PR and PA, these important medicines to be registered quicker with all the possible administrative and process efficiencies utilized by the regulator to ensure that the process is as speedy as possible. There was one repeated comment by multiple respondents that the health technology assessment bodies do not look as favorably at the limited or early evidence of safety and efficacy. And so they are more reluctant to grant reimbursement for the provisional approval products, making this pathway actually less desirable and less useful in Australia than it could be. And within Australian context, the medicine needs to be included in Australian Register for Therapeutic Goods, and that would mean that it's licensed to sell in Australia. But it also needs to be assessed by the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, deemed eligible for reimbursement and listed on Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme. And in this way, it's subsidized and reimbursed by the government or health insurer by the payer and actually made available to the patient. So if there is no effective reimbursement pathway, there may be little benefit to patients who effectively cannot access this medicine. And these comments actually support a body of research that has been done independently and indicates there is a gap between registration and reimbursement in Australia. Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee holds 3 scheduled meetings each year, usually in March, July, and November. And if the company gets quicker approval, it may mean for them that they make it to the earlier cycle of review by the BAC. So it's very important. The timing is important in Australia from this perspective as well. For provisional approval, there were a number of comments saying that they would wish to have a more clear post-registration commitments description, and they would like to extend the registration period until clinical confirmatory data is actually available and not just a blanket 6 years. So once the provisional approval is granted in Australia, is granted for 2 years, it can be extended to the further 2 years and then 2 more years with review at each time point at 2 years and 4 years for further extension. But by 6 years, the company must provide a full data set and transfer to a standard registration. And this just brings us to an article which is referenced here below by O'Brien et al. It's a 2019 article where the authors outline what they see as cornerstone essential 10 pillars to create a strong and regulatory review system. And I've listed those pillars in here in the tiles. We can see that the Australian regulatory reform has helped improve and advance TGA on almost all of them, I would say. The entire review demonstrates that TGA is quite committed to develop a better regulatory landscape and regulatory science. And there has been an obvious progress towards regulatory convergence and reliance and recognition, which come through the comparable overseas regulator pathways. And the technical harmonization is enhanced by those pathways as well, and the elements are similar, so it's really 21st century best practice in action. And when these guidelines were developed and when this new regulatory landscape in Australia was developed, it was done by a very wide consultation with multiple stakeholders, so consumer groups and healthcare professionals and industry, and many forums were done by Department of Health and the panel. And so we can see that these are generally fit for purpose, and the industry wants to utilize them. So that's the preliminary data from the survey and from the literature review on this. And this brings us to the end of this presentation, so I don't know if we do questions or...
Thank you. This is Melissa Tice from George Washington University. I had a question for you. At these 2-year reviews, what does the TGA look for? I know in Europe they have the conditional approval and they have a yearly review to maintain that conditional approval. What kind of review scrutiny does the TGA do at the every 2-year mark to review?
So as part of the risk management plan, there is a clinical trials plan that a company must provide at the beginning when they do the initial application. So TGA would look that you're still on track to compile your clinical data and submit it in time, whether you need any extension or not after those 2 years. Basically, the main point I would say is whether you are on track with your clinical trials to provide a full dossier. That's the very main point. And they reassess the benefit safety, benefit risk profile, and look at the data that has been generated up until then. And they may, because it's a higher uncertainty products, they have more say than they would typically. So they can actually change your population indication and so on. They can limit the population that your medicine could be prescribed to, or change your indication or limit it. Or, yeah.
So they actually can make real-time changes if they find that the risk-benefit is not benefiting for that patient population, that
Yes.
They can narrow your indication statement. Okay,
yes.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Hi, this is Anu from GW. Quick question. You've mentioned there are 7 pathways for registration in Australia, right?
Yes.
I'd like to go back to the slides. Is it possible?
Yes, of course. I think you can toggle yourself even, because it's called Teams Live, and I think you can. Yep.
All right. 7 pathways, and out of these, 2 are the expedited pathways, correct?
2 expedited ones, yes. So priority review is expedited in the sense that the regulator would assess the full application with the full dossier within shorter time frame, 150 days. And provisional approval is expedited mainly in the sense that your product can be approved at earlier stages of development. So the review process will be almost as long as the standard one, but it's phase 2 clinical development, so it's much quicker.
Okay. So the review time is same as the standard review time for the provisional?
Yeah, so the legislative time frame for all of them is 255 days, but then within that time, TGA tries to assess. They have a target time frame, which for priority review is 150 days, and for provisional approval, 220. So they call it on their website, we prioritize those important medicines within the time frame.
Sure, thank you. And these are established in 2017 for the priority review and 2018 for the provisional. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. July 2017 for priority review is when the legislative changes came through. It was on one of the slides somewhere. March 2018 for provisional approval.
Thank you.
And then 1 month after, a company has already had their determination approved. So very quickly, people were very eager to start using those pathways, obviously.
So in 1 month, like it's able, the TGA is able to approve the medication?
No, that's actually an important point, thank you. So for both PR and PA, a sponsor has to have a determination in place, a valid determination in place. So if we just go to this pathway to the first row, TGA assesses whether this medicine meets the criteria. And then if it does, they approve determination. They approve PR determination or PA determination for the company. Within 6 months after they have their determination approved, the sponsor has to submit the full dossier. That's for priority review. For provisional approval, because it's, again, higher uncertainty, they have 6 months to submit once they get their determination, but it's possible to extend it to the further 6 months and allow them to collect whatever data they have from the phase 2 trials and compile it and get it to the regulator.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but the time frame for TGA to assess, like to decide, is 40 TGA working days, and it just shows that within 1 month calendar, company and regulator time, if a determination was approved, it's quite quickly. It just shows that, yeah, shows interest.
Thank you for your presentation, Alina. I think we might move on to Daniel's presentation now. So
Thank you.
Stop sharing yours, and I'll ask Daniel to share his presentation. And while he's doing that, just a bit of background. So Daniel Ramirez is a student at Ohio State University, where he's pursuing his master's degree in clinical research management. He has a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Texas, and he's spent a number of years working in clinical research. And currently he's a clinical data manager for the MS company. So I'll hand over to Daniel to load up your slides and give your presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that introduction, Maureen. I appreciate that. And thank you everyone for joining us. I'm grateful today to be able to present. Today I'll be discussing digital health trends for research professionals. This is a very broad discussion of this topic, but I hope you'll be able to find it stimulating in some way. So the first thing we'll discuss today is just an introduction to digital health. Digital health is the use of data and communication technology in health professions to manage illnesses and health risks, as well as to promote wellness. Currently, the FDA defines the scope of digital health to include categories such as mobile health, which is mHealth, health IT, wearable devices, and telehealth and telemedicine. And I think the best introduction to digital health is just to break these categories down. So wearable devices, they fall under the category of mHealth, and their features are distinctive enough to warrant their own category, namely smart sense tracking. Wearable devices have the unique capability of tracking physiological parameters as well as metabolic status. Wearable devices fall into 4 application areas: health and safety monitoring, chronic disease management, disease diagnosis and treatment, and rehabilitation. mHealth is defined by the World Health Organization as the use of mobile and wireless technologies to support the achievement of health objectives. This includes, but is not limited to, mobile apps and personal smart devices that enable the user to record and collect data while mobile. The key feature that distinguishes mHealth as a clearly defined category is the aspect of self-care. Mobile technologies enable patients to capture data on their own without the help of a healthcare provider. They can then use this information on their own to manage their wellness and health risks. Overall, the goal of mHealth is to enable patients to better manage preventive care, encouraging patients to track nutrition, exercise, mental health, and other aspects of self-care that improve their health. And telehealth is the use of a virtual platform to deliver health information. While these definitions are like mHealth, the key distinction is that mHealth is strictly relegated to self-care, while telehealth encompasses all instances of healthcare via modern technology. Within this category is telemedicine, the practice of remote electronic medicine. These include, but are not limited to, prevention, monitoring, and medical care. Telemedicine can further be divided into 3 services: synchronous, which is real-time health information with a live discussion component; asynchronous, which is health information stored and transferred to a physician or specialist at a later time; and remote monitoring, continuous evaluation of a patient's clinical status, which can be direct via video monitoring or review of tests and images collected. Utilization of telehealth has recently been bolstered by new technology, like mobile applications on smartphones and the COVID-19 pandemic, expediting telehealth status as a permanent fixture in modern healthcare. And finally, health IT. Per the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, health IT is the processing, storage, and exchange of health information via electronic methods. While it is a broad field, health IT is focused on electronic health records, personal health records, electronic prescriptions, privacy, and security of health information. Research found that most clinical studies use health IT to identify and prevent patient safety issues and healthcare quality issues. Now I'd like to discuss new trends in digital health regarding the healthcare field. First is personalized medicine, which is through genetic testing is proving to be one of the most exciting breakthroughs in modern medicine. Also referred to as precision medicine, it is an emerging practice that uses the genetic profile of an individual to formulate a personalized treatment plan in the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of disease. This can be accomplished in several ways. The first is mutation-specific therapies, which use genetic profiles with specific gene mutations to identify possible therapies uniquely tailored for these profiles. The next is personal threshold monitoring. For individuals susceptible to a disease or its recurrence, this early detection strategy uses legacy values of a measure collected for an individual over time to track significant deviations from these to catch changes in their health status. Personalizing disease prevention is the use of genetic information to decrease the risk of disease development. Big data in healthcare encompasses high volume, high diversity biological, clinical, environmental, and lifestyle information collected from single individuals to large cohorts in relation to their health and wellness status at one or several time points. Big data is often defined by the 4 V's: volume, variety, velocity, and veracity. Analysis is accomplished using data mining algorithms to establish patterns and correlations interpretable by humans, but which would not have been possible using humans. By managing and analyzing medical big data, it can be used to increase early diagnosis and quality of treatments by discovering early signals and new disease interventions. By identifying risk factors for disease, big medical data can increase the possibilities for disease prevention. Finally, we can discuss artificial intelligence and machine learning in health systems. These are also poised to become breakthrough technologies. Machine learning, a subdiscipline of AI, uses algorithms to discover associations of significant power from data. In a method referred to as deep learning, this technology uses large quantities of raw data fed to it to learn necessary patterns to accurately detect or classify deep learning. It is special and it makes less assumptions about the raw data being fed to it, allowing it to handle complex data. Now, as far as regulatory processes for digital health, for the most part, digital health is subject to the standard laws and regulations that oversee all clinical research. These include HIPAA, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, the Federal Trade Commission Act, and the FTC's Health Breach Notification Rule. In 2016, the 21st Century Cures Act was signed into law. It, among other things, amended the definition of a medical device, which helped establish regulations for digital health technologies. Today, we'll instead discuss guidances that the FDA has issued to establish their current thinking regarding digital health technologies. In 2019, the FDA issued guidance on their, at the time, current thinking regarding device, software functions, and mobile medical applications. They issued this guidance to inform manufacturers, distributors, and other entities about how the FDA intends to apply its regulatory authorities to select software applications intended for use on mobile platforms or on general purpose computing platforms. For software functions that are not medical devices, mostly these aren't categorized as medical devices since they are low risk, don't deal with identifiable health information, or are not intended to be used for the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease or conditions. General wellness or communication applications that enable enhanced communications between patients, healthcare providers, and caregivers. Software functions for which FDA intends to exercise enforcement discretion. These are software functions that may be intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease. Note that even though this category may in fact meet the definition of a medical device, because they pose a lower risk to the public, the FDA will still only exercise enforcement discretion. These include, but are not limited to, software that helps patients with diagnosed psychiatric conditions maintain behavioral coping skills, mobile apps that use GPS location info to alert asthmatics of environmental conditions that may cause asthma symptoms, and software functions that prompt a user to enter which herb or drug they would like to take concurrently and provide info about whether interactions have been seen in literature. And finally, software functions that are the focus of FDA's regulatory oversight. These software functions do meet the definition of a device under Section 201H of the FD&C Act. Their functionality poses a risk to patient safety if it is not used as intended. Generally, these are software functions or mobile apps that transform a mobile platform into a regulated medical device. An example would be using built-in features of the mobile platform, such as light, vibrations, or camera, to perform medical device functions. Examples are software that use sensor or LED as an electrocardiograph or ECG, software that uses a microphone or speaker as an electronic stethoscope, or an accelerometer to measure physiological parameters during CPR. As previously discussed, FDA regulatory oversight of digital health technology is often dependent on whether they meet the definition of a medical device. However, there are a subset of technologies, medical products, that contain several functions, some of which are subject to FDA regulatory oversight and others that are not. Part of the 21st Century Cures Act states that in the case of product with multiple functions that contains both a software non-device function and a device function, the FDA may assess the impact that software non-device function has on the device function when assessing the safety and effectiveness of the device function. The following guidance states that the FDA intends to expand this approach to all multiple function device products. In the pre-market review of a device function under review, FDA may assess the impact of other functions on the device function under review. The pre-market assessment of a product with multiple functions is summarized in a two-step process. Is there an impact on the safety or effectiveness of the device function under review as a result of the other function? And if there is an impact, could the impact result in an increased risk or have an adverse effect on performance of the device function under review, i.e. negative impact? And depending on what the answer is, the result could either be to just document the impact assessment and justification for determination of impact, or include the appropriate documentation in the pre-market submission. Now on to digital health and its interactions with data science, which is data management and informatics. Data collection has always been a key part of research. As technology grows more advanced, it's easier to collect even more data points and harvest valuable information that can determine the effectiveness of a drug or treatment plan. Still, just because the data is collected doesn't necessarily mean it gets used. As a result, hundreds of key data points are often ignored or thrown out during the analysis and publishing process. AI and machine learning developers are working to fix this. They want researchers to use the data points they collect in the short run, but also in future trials. Companies are using machine learning approaches to understand the data they already have in-house and how they can more effectively learn from it for future studies and trials. Machine learning is leading researchers into the future of data optimization, or getting more from the information collected from patients. These systems can also work to improve data cleaning, so fewer data sets are rejected because of collection errors and system hiccups. Not only can CROs do more with the data they collect, but machine learning and AI systems can also help them pull from existing data sources outside of the trial environment. Before, randomized control trials were the only gold standard for gaining scientific knowledge in drug development and in medicine. And in this context, we're discussing real-world data, which is data derived from a number of sources that are associated with outcomes in a heterogeneous patient population in real-world settings. Examples are patient surveys, clinical trials, and observational cohort studies. With the advent of real-world data, they provide a reasonable and more representative alternative to randomized control trials. The data from RWE study cohorts can contain much more information than the data from an RCT. This is mainly due to the much larger sample size and often longer observation period that can easily be achieved in comparison to RCTs with limited durations in which patients are willing to participate. The goal of implementing AI in machine learning systems is to move pharmaceutical treatments to market faster. This in turn gets patients the medications they need with fewer side effects and costs. Future trials will be less wasteful and can be completed in shorter times while still completing each research step thoroughly. CROs and sponsors are already looking to hire researchers with backgrounds in data science who can use these systems and optimize them. In the future, clinical research is here, and it is machine learning. Artificial intelligence and machine learning cannot solve every problem with clinical research. However, these tools can increase the amount of data collected, pull multiple data sources, and ensure the data is clean for research to properly analyze. In a few hours, they can accomplish tasks that would take human researchers months or even years. These efforts can benefit the research development of treatments while getting the right therapies into the hands of patients faster. While these are the potential applications, there are current barriers. Progress in digital health raises compelling ethical, legal, and social implications, or ELSI. It is paramount to the preservation of trust that digital technologies be transparent. We're increasingly seeing data be artificially created, so it's important that the non-human dimensions of data are disclosed, including the usage of models and algorithms. Therefore, medical decisions supported by digital technologies should be more transparent and understandable in order to guarantee accountability and avoid patient marginalization and exclusion. On a separate yet related note, Flawed algorithms can feed into human bias and potentiate discrimination. As the widespread use of facial recognition technology edges closer, questionable studies portraying facial traits as proxies for different characteristics multiply, raising justified concerns about bias. The same is true for extrapolating conclusions from online digital behavior. Defining the scope of consent for digital health and data science is difficult. On one hand, single-purpose consent is problematic as secondary uses are necessary for research care purposes, and reconsent is impractical. On the other hand, significant challenges are posed to classical informed consent models due to the expanding interactions between stakeholders and infrastructures. Along with these challenges to informed consent, the issues of patient autonomy, participation, and the doctor-patient relationship come into conflict with other challenges. Extracting meaning and knowledge from large quantities of data while protecting patients from misinformation and disenfranchisement. The issues of privacy, confidentiality, and data protection are recognized as fundamental rights in most jurisdictions and are especially challenging for digital health. Digital health data security has become a serious concern as poor protection measures combined with high transactional value exacerbate the risk of violations. The expansion of digital health, including telemedicine, and the multiplication of interconnected sensors and medical devices has rightly deserved regulatory attention. All of this to say that responsible use of data is key to preserving public trust. Clear and fair health data ownership rules beyond the traditional property approaches should continue to be developed and harmonized. Finally, I'd like to discuss some of the current applications of clinical research in digital health as well as future applications. In clinical trials, connected and portable devices are used to measure the safety and efficacy profile of experimental medicines and devices and ensure the well-being of subjects as they undergo testing. ECG devices have been used for the longest time to measure effects of drugs on the heart to catch signs of cardiac toxicity and disruption of heart rhythms, but over the years we've seen CGMs track the impact of experimental therapies on blood glucose metabolism, spirometry devices to track any effects on pulmonary function or signs of toxicity, as well as the use of ambulatory and home blood pressure monitors to check for hypertensive or antihypertensive effects. The future will bring increased use of very sensitive mobile actigraphy devices for voice and audio and facial image capture, ambulatory EEG devices, and the miniaturization of various larger devices, such as imaging tools, so they may increasingly be used at the patient's side in trials. Novel uses of these devices will come in the form of digital biomarkers using algorithms and computational models to make sense of incoming signals. For digital biomarkers as endpoints in trials, the digital biomarkers enabled by both clinical-grade sensors and consumer wearables are also finding their way into clinical trials, enabling biopharma companies to better understand aspects of a patient's health and gain a continuous understanding of disease progression and patient-reported outcomes. Improvements in the sensitivity devices and the creation of dedicated clinical-grade wearables to capture specific measures are driving innovation in clinical trials by allowing the inclusion of digital biomarkers as endpoints. Looking at the Digital Medicine Society Library of Digital Endpoints, which covers industry-sponsored studies of new medical products using digital biomarkers, more than 193 unique digital endpoints have been used in 96 trials, mostly testing drugs and devices. Neurology, endocrinology, and respiratory trials have made the greatest use of digital endpoints and account for 60% of digital endpoints measured. And among the neurologic conditions being tested are pain, restless leg syndrome, and other sleep disturbances. Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, while in the respiratory space, asthma, COPD, and pulmonary arterial hypertension are key focuses. Among the health concepts tracked by digital biomarkers, most asserted physical activity and the various aspects of sleep, uses that are already well established, followed by biomarkers measuring glucose levels such as time and range, which is starting to become more conventional using continuous glucose monitors and glycemic variability. And finally, onto the discussion of decentralized and hybrid trials. The use of clinical-grade connected devices to remotely monitor patient symptoms and health status, along with novel uses of digital biomarkers to detect unique endpoints of interest, are changing the face of clinical development projects. Combined with the use of telemedicine and even the ability of home health nurses or mobile phlebotomists to visit patients at home, the feasibility of running clinical trials away from centralized hospital or other research location has grown. For the purposes of this presentation, decentralized trials are defined as trials focused on bringing the trial to the patient by utilizing a platform or technology to communicate with remote study participants and collect data through means such as telemedicine, mobile or local health providers, and mobile technologies such as connected devices. Hybrid trials combine remote, home-based visits along with traditional site visits to reduce patient burden and streamline operational execution. One key use is likely to be long-term observational extension studies tracking safety after an interventional phase that can therefore be in a light-touch hybrid design. Hybrid trials are expected to reduce the number of on-site visit patients needed to have while participating in a trial. Between 44 to 61% of visits in phase 2 and 3 clinical trials are being shifted off-site in hybrid trials, depending on the therapy area, with 51% on average in phase 3 and 58% in phase 2 trials across therapy areas. That is the end of the presentation. At this time, if there's any questions I can answer, I'd be happy to, and thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. Hi, this is Melissa Tice from GW. In your research here, we know that in the 21st Century Cures Act that was passed in December of 2016, the FDA was encouraged to incorporate or support the use of real-world data. And I was wondering in your research for your presentation here or your project, had you run across the use of some of this real-world data from your mobile apps or from any of this digital health information that was supportive or even helped a drug get approved?
I didn't have time to pull from real-world examples of this, but I think that's something that I would be very interested to learn more about, to find actual uses of this. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I could just comment that I'm not sure it's exactly what you're looking for, but there's an interesting paper coming out by Storm and his colleagues from Amgen who used real-world data from databases collected on an approved drug, a drug that was approved in Taiwan and Hong Kong, to substitute for bridging studies in China. So China was able to accept the data on from Hong Kong and Taiwan from the insurance databases and government databases in lieu of doing a bridging study and getting approved there, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you.
Hi,
Can I just make,
Daniel.
can I make a comment?
Oh, yes.
I really enjoyed the presentation. Just one example of real world data that I'm familiar with, or not that familiar with, is I think it's paliperidone. It's a schizophrenic drug. I think a couple of years ago, new information was added about its role or impact. It's an anti-schizophrenic drug, and that population tends to be incarcerated because of their medical condition, because it leads to behaviors that are illegal sometimes. And they showed through real world data that there's reduced reincarceration rate when the drug is given, which I think that was through real world data. That was not a controlled clinical trial, prospective trial. So kind of amazing, pretty big impact. Something I found amazing is that I became aware of this because a student brought it to my attention, and you would think something that important, you would hear about it. But yeah, which I thought was fascinating, that wasn't sort of a promoted benefit of the drug, even though obviously that's real impact. But I enjoyed the presentation. I guess I do have a question.
Sure.
I don't work in the real world space or the post-market space, but I'm just kind of amazed how it's exploded over the years. And I've kind of just noticed that there's some guidances going on. I don't know if you've seen any of that or can maybe bring us up to date about any changes there.
Nothing that I've seen recently. All I can say is from my experience, very much looking forward to some of this technology helping with patient retention, recruitment, and follow-up visits, because from what I've seen, that seems to be the most difficult part of clinical trials, from my experience in data management. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I had a graduate student in another program contact me today, as a matter of fact, about how can we use AI to improve advanced practice, nurses and PAs to refer the oncology patients to the clinical trials given the low and, just there's a lot of gaps still. We haven't solved the problem with recruitment at all. I just posted an article that did an overview of some drug approvals through real world evidence. I think COVID really flipped us over. All of these applications seemed very 2001 Space Odyssey, in the future, one of these days. And then it's here faster than we know it. So how do we educate our students to understand that, and how is that going to affect our curriculum? I see that as a new challenge. Or do I have to go from 36 hours to 40 just to cover all the new stuff? I have to jump off. Thank you to both of you for your wonderful presentations. I'm meeting with students doing their final presentations actually tonight, so I've got to jump off for that.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining our webinar today. Thank you very much, Daniel and Alina, for your excellent presentations. I wish everyone a wonderful coming up holiday season, and looking forward to a new series of webinars from AgRay in the new year. So thanks, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you to the presenters. Thank you.
Thank you.